All right, this lesson is on the basics of animation. We call them traps, the different types of transformations, and also your basics of editing after the fact. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at some of these so that we know what they look like, and then we're going to go over how to create them. Okay, so here we're looking at a file that's already been done. So if we look at all of these, basically the first one is just a stationary object that appears during the whole time, which is this background. The next object is paramount, and we're showing you scale there. And the next object is movement, so that's showing you position. And the next one is rotation, and that's showing you a combination of rotation and anchor point. And then the next one is showing you opacity. Okay? And that's basically the basics of animation traps. Okay? All right, so now we're going to move on and open up a file that's blank so that we can go over how to do this. And basically, I already have a project open here in After Effects, and I've already set it up. You'll be learning about this setup more in your homework, but I already set it up in the interest of time. I have different assets in here that I'm going to be able to animate. So we're going to go ahead and start off by just placing an image. So I have this one here under images, and it's called background, and you notice I just unfolded that area. I'm going to go ahead and drag it onto the stage. And you'll notice it's on the stage, and then it also created a layer here, okay? And by default, what will happen is that if we move the handle here and we go through the timeline, you'll notice it is visible throughout the whole 600 frames here, which is 20 seconds. I'm going to go ahead and put it at the beginning, and then I'm also going to shrink this down just so that you can see all of it here, the whole 600 frames, okay? So that's how you get an image to just be visible throughout the whole duration, whether it's your video or whether it's a background image that you always want to keep there, okay? Now we will learn about how you make things appear and not appear at different times in the timeline, but we're going to learn about that in just a bit. Now the other thing that you'll notice here is if you open up this area here, is that you have the ability to transform things here. And basically when you change these settings here only, it's the equivalent of, say, rotating or scaling the image here with these tools and doing it manually on the stage. But basically whatever you do to that object, that's how it's always going to be visible, okay? But the other option that you have, and this is where the animation part comes in, is these options to click these stopwatches here first, then change these settings that allow you to make something start a certain way and then end up a different way. So it allows you to animate, okay? But say for this one, you don't want any animation. You just want this background to be permanently in a certain position and a certain scale. You can go ahead and just tweak the settings here, or like I said, you could change them here. I'm going to go ahead and show you here so that you can see the difference between pressing the stopwatch and not pressing the stopwatch. So here I'll just go ahead and scale it down. Okay, and then I'm going to also move it. And I could actually move it here in terms of position. That moves my up and down, and this one moves my left and right. Okay? But you can actually move it here if this is easier for you, and you'll notice that the numbers change. Okay, so pick your method. Either will be fine. If you wanted to rotate instead of here, you could use your rotate tool. If you wanted to just move it, you could use your selection tool. And if you wanted to scale it, you could also with your selection tool grab the edges. Sometimes you have to zoom out in here to be able to see the edges. I hold down shift so it constrains the proportions, okay? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and zoom back in. So basically, if you want to affect something permanently so that it always looks a certain way, you can either physically change it on the stage using your tools up here, or you can change it changing these settings here, okay? All right, now we're pretty much done with this one. It's the size that we want it, it's the position that we want it, and it's the whole duration. It's just going to sit there as a background, okay? All right. So we're going to go ahead, and when I'm done with something, I tend to close it up. And if I want it to just stay there, I'm going to go ahead and lock it. Okay? And I'm going to go ahead and close that up as well. Now I'm thinking, okay, what do I want to come in? So I'm going to say I want the logo to come in. So I'm going to grab it and I'm going to drag it. Okay? And then I'm going to position it. I'm going to do all my positioning manually here, even though I know that I can do it here, just so that it doesn't get confusing. I'm just going to do it here. I'm going to position it where I want. So now that I have it where I want it, I got to determine how long do I want this to be visible for. Do I want it to be visible from the very beginning? Do I want it to be visible the whole duration? Because by default, that's the way that it comes in. So I'm going to say no, I don't want it to be visible from the very beginning. I want it to start at about after 1 second, so around 30 frames. So I'm going to click right here on the edge and hold down and drag the edges in of this particular layer on this left-hand side to about 30. Around here's the 50 line, so around here around 30, 36, around there is good. That's about 1 second in is when I'm going to want that animation to appear. And I don't want it to last the whole time. I only want it to be visible for maybe 2 seconds. And then I'm going to click and hold down and drag in this right-hand side around here or so. And basically now if we were to play the timeline, we'll notice it's visible for a couple of seconds there. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pause it and bring it back to the beginning. So you notice that when I shrunk this, it's not visible here during this gap here where it's grayed out. Then it's visible, I'll grab my scrubber here, it's visible here. And then at that point in time, it disappears. Okay, so now I've established the amount of time that I want something to be visible for. But I don't actually like the way that it just appears. Boom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the way that this appears here. And I want this one to scale. Okay, so I want it to be from not being there at all to then gradually appearing about halfway through and then staying visible from that point forward until it disappears. Okay, so to get that to happen, I would want to get my scale selection. Now I could open all of this up and take a look at the transform and go to scale here. Or if I close all of this up and I just hit the S key, that's a shortcut for it. S is for scale. It'll just give you the scale option here so that you don't have to deal with all the other things, which can get a little tricky and you might change the wrong settings, okay? So it's up to you how you work. Then what I'm going to do is, because I know that I want to animate this from being very, very small to being bigger and changing in scale, I'm going to put my handle right here at the very beginning of this layer. Make sure that it's there. And then I'm going to hit the stopwatch, and that's going to activate the timeline to know that I'm starting to animate from this point. And you'll notice that it created a keyframe. This is a keyframe. This is what tells, hey, I'm activated to animate. Okay, and this particular point in time, something specific or special is going to happen, and then you have to show it or tell it what that is. Okay, so you can either go here and manually show it what that is, or you can do it here. It's really up to you. If I go in here and I click this and start dragging, and I hold down my shift key right as soon as I start dragging, you'll notice that the numbers are also shrinking. Okay, so you can do it that way, or if you want it even smaller, we'll go even smaller to like 0. Okay, I'm going to stop at 0. It's going to be a little bit tough to get there. You don't want to go negative. You can type it in if it gets too tough. Start dragging, and I hold down my shift key right as soon as I start dragging. To actually it'll appear as if it's not there. And right now, if we scrub the timeline, it's basically disappeared. From that point forward, it's disappeared. But we don't want that. We want to determine, okay, well, how long before we want it to actually grow to appear? And then we'll say, at this point in time, we just move our marker here. And if we just go here and change this, we'll just go and grow it and get it to the size we want. Boom. We'll get a keyframe right there. Then what we'll notice is if we scrub our timeline, it'll go from nothing to something. It'll go growing. And then from this point forward, it'll just be that size. Okay? And then at that point, it'll disappear. Okay? So that's how you scale, basically. We're going to go ahead and replay this so you can see it. If you don't like how fast or how slow it plays, the fast and the slow is determined by the space that's here. If I move this over closer, you'll notice it'll grow a lot faster. I'm going to go ahead and hit play. You see that? And if I move it out further, if the space is longer, it means it's going to take longer for it to grow to that size. Go ahead and hit play. See how that went slower? Okay, so it's just about modifying here and moving these to where you want them positioned. Okay, so basically from here, it's what it looks like when it's at 0% scale. And then here's what it looks like when it's at 100% scale. And this is the time it takes for that to happen. Okay, so this is your first keyframe and this is your second keyframe. So that's how we deal with scale. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close that up. Okay, I'm going to show you a different example. This one is on position transformation using type, or you would think of it as moving or a sliding type example. And the type isn't in here as a graphic. So I'm going to grab my type tool, and this one I'm going to create on the fly. And I'm just going to say presents. Okay, and by default it's all the way from the beginning all the way to the end, and I'm actually just gonna move my cursor basically on top of where the logo is so that I know where to position it. I'm gonna switch to my black arrow and I'm gonna position it relative to that logo here, okay? And then I'm going to say, okay, well, I know that I don't want it to already be here. I want it to appear sometime after here, okay? So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to shorten this. And I don't worry if I don't have it exactly where I want it or exactly the amount of time that I want it, because I can always modify this, okay? And I'll be showing you how to do that as we go. So I'm going to say at the very beginning, I want this to be down here. So I'm just going to move this off the stage where it's not visible. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I want to move this, okay? So if I want to move this, you can just select the layer and you can just try P, and you'll notice it'll just open position. So I'm going to hit the stopwatch, and it just created a keyframe letting this know that at this point in time, at this keyframe, this is the position of this object. And then later on, I'm going to want, say down here, maybe like a second later or something, I'm going to want this object, and I can either move it here or I can position it here. I can make it go up and go to the position where I want. So you'll see it go like this and then there. Okay, so I'll just leave it like that. And so that's how you move something, the position. I'm going to go ahead and close this up. And then to show you transformation example of rotation and anchor, we're going to introduce another image. Grab this guy here. And for him, I don't want him to appear up until after presents is there. So I'm going to actually shorten that. He presents, and he's going to block that off. And we're going to shrink the amount of time that he's visible for. And with this guy, what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate him. And to show you rotation, I'm going to actually open this one up because I want to see anchor and I want to see rotation because they kind of go hand in hand, and I'm going to show you those as a conjunction, okay? So I'm going to move it right to the beginning of his frame here. And the anchor point is just like in Illustrator, it's where you pivot from, okay, where you rotate something from. And right now it's currently set to the middle, okay? So if we were to rotate this, it would rotate from the middle, and that's not what I want. I actually want him to rotate from the bottom. So I'm going to, before I start animating any rotation or anything, just here where, without hitting the stopwatch, just so it's permanently like that, I'm going to change the anchor point, okay? And you can notice you can move it down. So I'm just going to move it to where it's positioned at the base there, okay? And you'll notice that it actually looks like it moved the position of this, so we're going to actually just grab this and physically move it down. So we're also changing the position, okay? But now it's being done permanently, okay? Meaning that that's where it's going to be unless we animate to do something different, okay? So what we're going to actually change is only the rotation here, and now I'm going to hit the stopwatch now that I've changed my anchor point and everything. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the stopwatch, and now that I've hit the stopwatch, that's what it's going to look like at the beginning. And now I'm going to designate the time that it's going to rotate, and I'm going to say here, I'm going to want it to rotate and go down just a bit right there, and then I'm going to go to the end here, and at the end of it I'm going to want it to go back. So I'm just going to go back and put it back at 0. And if you can't get the 0 exactly by scrolling it, you can just type it in manually. So there it is. So it'll go like this. Boom. Boom. Okay. That's your rotation. Now once I got that, I'm going to add like actor names. So I'm going to use opacity to fade them in. So I'm going to go ahead and close all of this up. And actor names, I'm going to go ahead and just type these in. I don't have a asset for them here. So I'm just going to go ahead and type here and say, okay, and I'm just going to move it over. And I'm going to actually shrink it a bit because it's just too big. Okay. And with Bruce Willis, now that I positioned him and I got him everywhere where I want him, I don't want him to appear just yet. I want him to appear after. So I'm just going to go ahead and shrink this. Go ahead and shrink this also. Okay. And then we have it appearing. Okay. And what I want with Bruce Willis, instead of it just popping up, I want to do opacity on it. So it's going to go from not being visible to being visible and staying visible for a while and then just disappearing. So I'm going to go ahead and put it at the beginning of the timeline here. And the shortcut for that, you could either open it up and look for opacity, or the shortcut for that is a T. And basically I'm going to hit my stopwatch here. That gives me a keyframe. At the very beginning, I don't want it to appear. I want it to not be visible. So I'm going to change this to 0. So that means it's 0 opacity. It's not visible at all. And then I want it to gradually grow and then from this point on be visible at 100%. So I'm just going to stop here and then I'm going to change that one to 100%. So what will happen is from this point here, it'll be not visible and then it'll gradually grow and it'll be visible all the way to the end and then it'll disappear. Okay? Okay. And that covers opacity. And that's basically the basics of animation traps. To edit your timeline, if there's anything in here that you didn't like, you can always go back in here and open these. So let's say that you wanted this Bruce Willis here to appear while he was still visible. You can actually move that over to overlap with him and you'll see him pop up. Okay? Maybe you don't want him to appear until it moves completely out of the way or whatever, and you might need to scoot it backwards and forwards. Up to you. Okay? So you can move these manually. You can also open these up and you can change. If the opacity takes too long to appear, you can actually open that up further and move these anchor points closer together so that the appearing happens faster. Okay, if you put it really, really, really close, you'll notice, we'll go back here, it'll happen faster. Okay, I actually like it to happen slower, so we'll go here. Okay, so you can always grow these larger, shrink these shorter. Okay, and you can also reposition them. You'll notice that their keyframes follow them. I'm going to put it back. Okay, and you can also, if I close this up, you can also reorder these by dragging them beneath and above each other if you want something to appear on top or below something else. Okay, so there you have it. There's your basics of animation and also your basics of editing after the fact. If you have any questions, please be sure to contact me.